get moving. So I want to first of all thank everyone for joining us. My name is Christopher Stefani. I'm the Associate Director of LTU's Detroit Center for Design and Technology. And on behalf of myself, the DCDT, and Lawrence Tech's College of Architecture and Design, I want to thank you all for coming out and joining us for this panel today. We've got a really interesting group of multidisciplinary people working in the design, architecture, and built environment, and I think we'll really have some great conversation today. Today's panel is brought to you as part of Detroit Month of Design. This is their 10th anniversary, a brilliant festival that's been held annually here in Detroit and led by our friends and partners at Design Core Detroit. Little quick round of applause for them. 10 years in a row, getting the city of Detroit into a UNESCO design designation is no easy feat. And I know that this staff at Design Core work tirelessly year-round to help produce these events and really bring this city to the forefront when it comes to design locally here in Detroit, but also bringing us to a national and an international scale. So congrats to them on 10 years, and thank you for having us as part of this. I am going to go through and give you an overview of what we'll be looking to discuss today, and then I'm going to call on our panelists to give you a brief introduction of themselves, and we'll get going. So as many of us know, 2020 has been a year like no other. That's unless you were around for 1918 and the Spanish flu, in which case then maybe it's comparable to something else you've experienced. For most of us, as I'm not seeing anyone logged in at 102, I'd say it's pretty fresh for us. So you know, COVID has really pushed us all into a different environment when it comes to employment and unemployment and operations in the creative fields on a whole. We see that states are continuously moving back and forth between stay-in-place measures, states of emergency, and we're constantly all volleying back and forth as our government and society is trying to understand how to deal with this. So to this point, the question really became, how, with us working and being involved in the creative fields, do we find there to be a sense of resilience within our profession, within our multiple professions in these strange times, both currently with the COVID situation and even historically with other recessions that we've seen in the past. Focuses that we're going to really try to hit on are the assets and liabilities that we're encountering as our states have moved back and forth. And we've seen all types of furloughs and unemployment take place in this part of the creative field. And also we've shifted very strongly, as we are here today in Zoom versus in person, to a work at home kind of remote virtual model. We're going to look to discuss the historic marriage between hard economic times and the work that's taking place in the creative fields, especially that might be conceptual. And really even, I'd like to further the conversation and explore how emerging technology and software is either aiding or becoming a liability for us in this time. So without further ado, and with that bit of an overview, I'd like to start with our first panelist for a light introduction, Miss Lilian Crum. Everyone, for our panelists as we go through, and I'll call you out from there, if you could give us a bit of information on your background professionally, maybe go ahead, drop a personal note in. Do you have a dog or two that's really a lovely thing in your life? And then we'll roll forward from there.
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, I'm Lilian Crum. I'm an assistant professor of graphic design and the director of graphic design at Lawrence Tech University. I'm also a partner and lead designer at Unsold Studio. So that's a collaborative design studio, and we focus on producing work for primarily creative culture, lifestyle brands, and the public good, and we've been doing that for almost 8 years. 2 dogs, 2 cats, and an almost 6-month-old.
Lilian, there we are, leading a company and no shortage of people at home for any doubt. So brilliant. Thank you so much, Lilian. Our next panelist is Karl Daubmann. Karl?
Thanks, Chris. Dean of the College of Architecture and Design, architect and designer, and seems like I manage far fewer things than Lilian does. No dogs, no cats, no kids. But that's impressive, Lilian.
That's great. Carl's like, I have 3 pigeons that have not left my in the last week, though. So let's not undersell ourselves. No, brilliant. Thank you, Karl. Our next panelist, Lauren, if you could give yourself an introduction, Miss Lauren Pedigo.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I am an architectural designer at Smith Group. I've been there for almost 5 years. Next month, it'll be 5 years. And in the past year, I've mostly worked in the urban studios. I think that's what I'll be talking about a lot today, but also have background in healthcare and workplace. I do have a dog, very adorable, and you might hear her bark, but I'll try not to have that happen.
Always fine to add on fuzzy panelists, so she's welcome to join us at any time. And next in our lineup, Miss Jasmine Sisson. Am I saying that right, Jasmine? Is that the proper pronunciation of your last name?
It's a lot easier. It's just Sisson.
Then, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Jasmine Sisson.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jasmine. I work at WSP. Pre-pandemic, I worked out of the downtown Detroit office. For the last 6 months, I've been working at home. I wear a lot of hats for WSP. I'm an assistant vice president. I'm the Michigan structures manager, and I am the operations manager. From that, I'm sure you can tell I'm a structural engineer. I've got over 20 years now. I don't like saying that, but over 20 years of experience now designing both private and public civil and structural engineering projects. Some fun facts about me: I was one of the first nationally certified tunnel inspectors in Michigan, probably as you can imagine, because we don't have a whole lot of tunnels in Michigan. But I'm also very passionate about mentoring young people. And currently I'm the program coordinator for ACE Mentor of Michigan, which is supported in part by LTU. Thank you very much, Chris and Karl, and everybody else that supports the program, which helps high school students make that transition between the classroom and the real world. And so I am very passionate about that, and love to put the engineering profession out there so that it becomes something that's reachable and doable for students out here.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for joining us. And last but certainly not least, Miss Nur Saltik. Nur.
Thank you, Chris. I'm Nur Saltik. I'm the assistant professor at Industrial Design Program in LTU. I'm also the director of Industrial Design Program. I have a design studio called Form and Seek. I'm the founder and director of Form and Seek Design Studio. We focus on creating and curating uniquely crafted products. We started 8 years ago, and we have a very international team, which is located. A fun fact about me, actually, I moved to Michigan a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago. I'm originally Turkish, and Form and Seek started in London. So you actually get a little bit different perspective from me about resilience in this panel, because I actually seen a lot of different economies and dealt with their crisis as well.
Never a shortage of crisis in an economy anywhere.
Change the city if you're in crisis.
No doubt. And to our earlier statement, Nur is a perfect example too of Detroit becoming a spot internationally recognized for design. And again, I know that we have Bonnie Fahum, who's joined us from Design Corps. So again, thank you to our team at Design Corps for putting on this excellent 10th anniversary month of design. So, all right, well, without any further delay, I think let's just get right into the questions here. I've discussed with the panelists, we had a little fireside chat our own selves earlier before starting the panel of how we're gonna go about this. So I am going to put out the questions. I will title myself Question Master for this evening. And from there, please feel free, panelists, to jump in and give your insights on those. For the time being, those of you that are participating via Zoom, please feel free to throw any questions that are directly related to the topic that's being discussed in the chat box, and I will work to bring those to our attention. Then we'll also have a bit of Q&A time at the end of the discussion. All right, so going forward, panelists, what effect would you say the shelter in place, change in workplace model has had mostly on you professionally? Is there a negative or a positive aspect to those things? And maybe I'd even reframe this. What is the most positive and what is the most negative aspect that you've come into experience with through your professional work with this shift to a virtual kind of working, work from home method?
Well, I can jump in with maybe not a negative, but a very challenging wrench that threw in. So we have been working remotely since the early part of March, I think. So it's just been 6 months now. And the challenge for me as a group manager is that I had some brand new employees starting just before that. And when I say brand new, I mean not just new to the office, but new to working full time, as in new graduates. So they had just a little taste of what working in the industry was like, and they were just getting accustomed to the company and the policies and procedures with the company, and I was just getting them into some design tasks. And with at least with structural engineering, a lot of that is very close, like literally sitting at the same table, looking at plans, pointing at things on the screen. When you're talking about new staff, new engineers, so that was very challenging for not just for me, but for that new staff that started, in our group, because they weren't getting that one-on-one. Though this platform, this virtual conference, virtual meeting platform, I'm thankful for it because there at least something is here for us to use, but it doesn't replace the face-to-face interaction that you get when you're sitting in the same office, when you're sitting next to each other in a chair, looking at things. It's just not the same. So the challenge for me has been continually trying to do the training that I would normally do standing next or sitting next to my staff, and trying to do it on the screen in a way that's effective for them, but also efficient for me. And those two lines don't cross often, I found. So there's a lot of pivoting because there's no way around it right now. Our offices, I know that some offices have opened. We don't have a choice. WSP offices are closed in Michigan. So we cannot go into the office as a group and sit. And even if when we are able to go in, we aren't able to sit next to each other like we normally would be pre-pandemic time. So there, we'd have to follow still the social distancing guidelines. So that's a continual problem or challenge that we're trying to work through. And we're trying to think of ways to do that. It's forced us to have to be more communicative about, sometimes when you're with somebody, you can just see in their body language and in their face if they don't understand something. And it's harder to read that across the screen, mostly because you only see this much of them also, and you don't get that kind of, sometimes you get like a feeling from somebody just being next to them that they're uncomfortable or they don't understand or whatever. So that's something we're continually trying to work through with this, and that's probably the biggest challenge. Design software and those kinds of things, they're all available for us, to remotely use and to have this platform. They were for us anyways, they were all in place and there for us to use because we had a flexible work schedule, so we could work from home pre-pandemic anyways. Clearly people weren't doing it as much as they are now, but so it's not so much the availability of the software, but it's the face-to-face, the person-to-person kind of relationship and training and working that you lose in this situation.
That's interesting. So really the human factor is a big change that you've seen in that.
Huge
Yeah.
change. Yeah.
To build on that, I'd like to propose that or pose that same question to Lauren. Lauren works at a large scale architecture firm, as she added in her introduction, and I think that balance between what's really strongly structural and engineering based versus a large scale architecture firm. What is your experience been with this, Lauren?
Yeah, mine was very similar. We had all the software in place. That wasn't the issue. People were used to working out of the office or working in the field. I think the biggest challenge I noticed, and talking to other people in the firm too, is not everyone's comfortable working with software. So people who are already in the office were ones who had to go up to their desk and say, hey, and have that face-to-face. You have to completely restructure and rethink the way you're going to engage certain people. So for everyone, it was relearning how to communicate with each other. We also got Microsoft Teams at the same time. So that added like a whole new way of sharing information and collaborating that some people just aren't as comfortable with or are going to pick up as quickly. But I will say a positive from coming from a larger firm and having people in different offices was because they didn't have the choice to meet in person, and that was their normal go-to, and that because virtual meetings became like the norm for everyone, whether they were in your office or not, a lot more people in different offices and different disciplines started working together. So I've noticed in the past stay-at-home months, however many it's been, they kind of drag on. I worked with so many more people in different offices that I never would have before because we were forced to get out of that habit of just grabbing a room and talking to each other.
That's interesting.
Well, and maybe Lauren, to pick up on that, just I think it's interesting what you're saying too, because having been maybe someone that was remote and then there's two other people that are in the same office, it feels like you're often left out of conversations. And so now there's a kind of neutralizing effect about the collaboration that might occur, which is super interesting. To spin a kind of positive on that.
Absolutely. You don't get the follow-up email. We talked about this. You just need to know these two things. Yeah.
So potentially even becomes a more inclusive way of working. I'm interested from Lilian and Nur, your perspectives of both running a more tightly owned design collaborative, your own selves. How have you both interacted with this?
I have a little different situation because my team is already international, so they were never here. So I was actually used to being on Skype all the time, or Zoom now. And I have 2 team members in Istanbul, more team members that we collaborate in London, and we get mostly international calls. What changed is people were not taking it positively before that we're not in the same country, even though it was becoming the common practice for big architecture companies that they may be based in Michigan, but they do a project in Singapore or vice versa. It was quite interesting in a way that some clients were like hesitant that we cannot actually touch elbows, so if the project is going to go well or not. And now the positive shift I'm seeing is, since now everyone knows it works, that actually we get more easily like get into projects. Obviously in the beginning, I know probably it's in your questions, in the beginning of it was shock for everyone, but like I think afterwards when people saw that we can actually do this through online, because all the softwares actually help us to share information and like build on top of our designs. So it's linked to everyone. One positive thing is I've been facing this challenge of how to, and you definitely spend more time than like you just saying something when you see someone on the corridor, and having an hour-long Zoom call is different, right? And it requires a little bit more planning beforehand. Like you need to organize all your files, you need to like make sure everyone in the team is aligned. I guess another part of this communication challenge is that but I think positive thing is now everyone knows that it works, that it's beneficial for my business at least.
So I became a first-time parent during the lockdown, which is strange timing. But what I quickly realized as I was getting back to work is that when there are resources that people rely on day to day, like childcare, whether it's at a facility or whether it's family members or friends or any kind of childcare in that capacity, when you lose that, your day becomes very different and your kind of work and life balance becomes very different. But I would say the same thing applies whether you're a parent or not. So I think when you're working from home, you wear all of your hats at once a lot of the time. So, you know, if I'm going to work, I can wear my professor hat, and then I can go home and wear my partner or parent hat or whatever that hat may be. But, you know, when you're working from home, it's hard to kind of create those boundaries. It becomes more challenging. That said, I think one of the positive things that I've experienced is this whole thing has really humanized people in the work environment. So there are a lot of people that I met for the first time through, you know, client work over the summer over Zoom, but you're meeting them, you know, in their living room, and then you're meeting their dog that enters the screen, and you're meeting their kid that runs in and makes noise. And I think it, in a way, gives permission for people to be just a little bit more human in that kind of environment. And I think that it breaks the ice also in some ways when you're meeting people for the first time in that environment. Yes, it's still impersonal, but I think there is that element of just humanity and life and forgiveness that we have to give one another.
It's an interesting perspective. I think two things that has come out of this conversation between what all of you had to share that I'd like to maybe dive a little bit further in is two different aspects. So we've all said, okay, how is it like you in the first person working? But I think an interesting point that Nur brought up is, one, how is it for our clients, you know, and how have we seen that interaction go? And is there, would you say that from a clientele perspective that things are kind of moving on as they are, or are you running into more kind of hurdles with that? And two is a question of efficiency. So we discussed that, yeah, you have software and you have this ability to do these things, but to your point about Jasmine with collaboration, your point about reaching out across the pond or into different countries with your clients, Nur, have we found that efficiency or timelines on projects have been expanded due to this? You know, is it something that we're start looking at going, okay, well, maybe this was originally a 3-month turnaround, but in a circumstance like this, we're looking at doubling that timeline? I'm interested to see what the perspective has been there, and not to recircle back to the first question, I'm looking at the client as well, but I'm also really interested, Karl, especially from your standpoint in education, where your clients are not only design clients themselves through your firm, but students and parents. You know, how has that interaction looked? I'll leave that up to you all to jump in.
Well, I mean, I would say one thing that we think about in education is just trying to mirror maybe the workplace for our students to some extent. And teaching a leadership class now to seniors and undergrad, it's this incredible period where everything that we're dealing with in school is exactly what the industry and the workforce is dealing with. And so if the students feel frustrated, which I think our students are quite nimble and quite able to adapt, but I think it's saying like, well, everything that we're dealing with in terms of how we meet in the classroom, this is the same thing that the workplace is trying to deal with now too. And I don't know if I have a sense that there's been such a simultaneity between those two things happening. It seems like one might lead, the other one follows, sometimes those flip, and it's exactly the same. So maybe it's the way that, like Lauren was talking about, a kind of neutralizing effect. There has been a kind of neutralizing effect between maybe disparity or differences between workplace and education, which I think is kind of fascinating. I mean, it does make me think too about Jasmine's point that the other kind of reflection maybe at a large scale is how quickly as a knowledge economy, which I would characterize design as, how quickly we were able to shift, right? And to not, I think it's important not to lose sight of things like, I know Jasmine deals with construction, right? And that there are very tangible and local things that we rely on every day. And so as an industry, we've been able to adapt really quickly but in terms of education, I think in terms of the way that Jasmine's talking about onboarding people, there's still almost a journeymanship, right? Or a kind of, you know, I teach you by doing, and then you do it, and then I watch you do it. And I just wonder how, you know, maybe there's a moment, I don't know if it can change, but as the knowledge economy, is there a different way? That seems like a very old school, that's the kind of farmer approach to education. Not that I'm opposed to it, but it's a kind of one-on-one, very personal, very slow means of educating someone. And we'll see if that starts to evolve over time. Because I feel for you, right? It is a very difficult thing to onboard someone at this day and time because of these circumstances.
Interesting. Well, I'll pose this question now, because I think that this is something I've been interested even asking many people, my own self. You know, we said, okay, we've seen this shift in practice model, we've seen this push towards technology. What, in your experience, has been the most useful piece of technology to helping you make this shift? And to Karl's point on being agile, maybe in the design world, and depending on where you are, whether you're at construction or education, or you're practicing with clients or collaborating with partners across the world, I'm interested to see what has been the most useful tool. I mean, Nur, you went through and said it's about having your files in order, having kind of yourself organized on the back end, so that when you're coming into these meetings, you're making the most of it because you have this time to interact with the person via Zoom or Skype. I guess my question that I would pose to the five of you is, outside of specifically Zoom or Skype or Google Hangout, what has been the most helpful or useful piece of technology that you've interacted with to help you go through this experience? It's all Zoom and Skype, isn't it?
Yeah. Interestingly, I would jump in. Any software that you can simultaneously change things was great. We do product design, so CAD work. We're not using a program like that, so we use Dropbox to file things, and it's meticulously in order, like it's the dates and all the archive and everything. Otherwise, it's impossible to follow up. But and then we see different versions of files, so we can mix and match things. But I would say personally, on top of my laptop, anything I can. So we're all on the move, even though we're stuck at home, right? Like, you don't have a workstation anymore. So anything that you can grab and go, like tablets, or like you can take a note on top, because it's also become, so these tools are adapting to us as well. So Zoom had certain things, they fixed it. Now we're saying like, oh, in classroom, for example, oh, can we get attendance through Zoom? And then they do something for it. And then we're asking new questions. We're designers, so that it's not going to end. But like, there are this habits that we're having. So we're actually forming a new etiquette, right? Because, for example, its first telephone got announced, people didn't understand each other as well, because we are used to like facial, like understanding, like that feeling, right? And then text messages or Twitter calls, like this big misunderstandings because people write in caps, or they're like, because there's no voice, or you don't understand that feeling. It's similarly, now we're building this Zoom etiquette that we're, especially in a design studio environment, we're used to. I'll show my doodles here. We used to pen and paper. So I use tablets and pens to sketch on top of someone else's drawing. So we get a screenshot of that, so it will be improved that way, stuff like that. So we're adapting as well and trying to use the technology that we have creatively, I would say.
I would say, for me, it may seem like an obvious answer, but I think it's really relevant, and that's a stable internet connection. And I bring this up because I think that it also creates a lot of inequality with adapting. You know, I grew up in a very rural, remote area outside of town, and I was the last person with dial-up out of everybody that I knew. And you know, and that was a while ago at this point. So, you know, the internet was still emerging, and I guess it wasn't so crazy that I still had dial-up. But I know that the way that I used the internet at that point was very different than how my peers used the internet. And I think right now, you know, there's so much reliance on a stable internet connection, whether it's just to hear a coherent sentence, whether it's to upload a file, you know, just any kind of back and forth communication is extremely obstructed if there's any kind of interference. There's a lot of people having to leave their homes and, you know, get onto Wi-Fi in parking lots and try to adapt that way. And so for me, I think that that's the number one thing. Without that, I don't really know how you could simply or more easily adapt.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Lilian. When an internet connection itself becomes an issue of equity and inclusivity, right? And so as technology becomes more prevalent, especially after moments like this, like moments where we're interacting with COVID-19, what happens when you don't have that access? What happens to the young adults who are going through our public school system right now, or et cetera, and are having to do education from home, and how does that start becoming a moment? It's really well-rounded answer there. Thank you for that insight. I think I'd like to pose this next question then, because what's missing? So technology-wise, we're all designers, right? And Nur, you said about, you know, you're used to doodling and working kind of in 2 dimensions, and yes, Zoom and the internet connection. What is a designer to you? And if I could get all 5 of you to answer this, in an idealistic or in a utopic view, is missing technology-wise that would help you work creatively in this kind of moment, in this time, in this technologically distanced practice method? I'm like, this is what we're going to record and then sell back to Apple to take care of this afterwards. So
I think the thing that I keep experiencing, and this ties into how we're teaching right now as well, where some of the classes, or, you know, a handful of the classes are in this online format. Jasmine brought it up earlier, but this idea of just organic collaboration or organic chit chat that happens, where over the Zoom environment, it's much more difficult to facilitate that. So, you know, in a room full of people, you might have a side conversation to the person next to you. But in a Zoom environment, if you speak in that capacity, you're announcing it to everybody who's in the same Zoom room as you. So I think in a lot of ways that changes the nature of the conversation and changes the nature of the way that people interact with one another. So whatever this piece of technology is, I think something that would help simulate or facilitate those kinds of interactions, I think would help us more smoothly transition to this world.
Interesting. Yeah, the ability to have these moments, these breakouts, or these influential conversations that maybe aren't planned, but have technology that's working for the unplanned moment. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Lilian. I think something that everyone's been saying about collaboration. So we use Mural, but like any type of collaboration tool to like get ideas and share and let everyone touch it and move things at the same time. It's already there, but I think the issue we're finding is that especially clients don't feel comfortable using it. So I don't know what it is, but something that will get people to actually move things and draw and put ideas in there because they're not used to doing it. And so when you're trying to, with what you can, create a more organic experience, or when they're saying sharing sketches, like that's what we use, it's just hard. So no idea other than how do you get people to actually use it a little bit more. And then another thing we've been having to change, and is probably not the best way, is we can't do workshops the way we used to, or we actually go and meet people face to face. And we can't go visit communities in different cities to get the background information the way we used to. So we have our own personal experience. So how do we get that information when we can't physically go and visit for a couple days? Yeah, those are most of our challenges right now.
mean, I was going to say, well, and I say this maybe in contrast to Lillian's point about bandwidth, but one of the things I've been playing with is Gravity Sketch. And I know Nur and I have been talking about this as well, as a virtual reality, completely immersive way to draw and model things, but they're also developing a co-creation model. And so it's an immersive way that people could share a model and work on it together and move through it at the same time. And so I think that's one thing. I was going to say, I mean, I like Lillian's point, and it's almost like what we're lacking is proximity to some extent, or like there's a kind of flattening, maybe in the way that Lauren said, there's a kind of a neutralization that happens among collaboration. There's also this incredible flattening. So just be able to like get away from someone in Zoom or get closer to someone in Zoom, and have those more intimate conversations when it's a big group, or to be able to break off. And there's breakout rooms, it doesn't provide the fluidity of it. And I guess I would say the other thing is maybe just some sense of touch. And I know there's a lot of technologies that people have been working on for a while, but in this period where everyone is so separated, I think there's a lot of design that deals with tactility and, what does it feel like? How does it, or even just to like make a point to someone when you reach out and kind of grab them, right? How do you do that digitally now? And to have a conversation or to emphasize something or to do something else. And I was even just looking at it on here, even just the way that we're positioned, like Nur uses her hands. And I think there is a way that we probably get used to being able to describe things more with using our hands on the screen, as opposed to sitting there and having a conversation, because there's so much, like to Jasmine's earlier point, we've taken away so many of the clues that we're used to seeing. And maybe there's another way that we have to learn how to communicate this way.
Interesting. It almost begs the question, and not to bring up the unpopular point of view, just depending on who you're speaking with, but do we almost start looking and learning from social media platforms, blog platforms, open source platforms, and pulling out things from there and bring them back into workplace technology and software, right? When you look at a digital platform that's completely set up about these kind of emotional connections, or how do you interact with someone, basically around just base interaction between posting something to a wall or private messaging or et cetera, is there space potentially inside of workplace software to learn from there and to adapt that into that style? Someone at Facebook smiling right now. I don't know who, but someone. Well, let me ask you this. I opened up this conversation saying that this has been a new thing for many of us going through this kind of time and experience through COVID-19. As again, none of us lived through the 1918 Spanish flu, but have you had an experience in some regard, any of our panelists, whether it's a recession, a resurgence, a renaissance even? I could take this from the positive aspect of things and say, looking at post-World War II public works projects where we knew that there was a lot of funding to be sent out to build new pieces of infrastructure and new cultural institutions. Have you experienced in your own practice or in your own way something like this before, positive or negative, and how did you interact with it when that time came? And I guess what I'll do is I'll frame this a little further, which is to say that obviously COVID has pushed us to a virtual working model, but we've definitely seen economic impacts take place because of it as well, right? We've seen layoffs and we've seen furloughs, and this is going to build into a later question, but in your own first person, have you experienced a downturn as a professional designer? Have you experienced a renaissance or an upturn that's been a base of your move professionally?
So I'll jump in on this one. I actually have a major client who was impacted extremely negatively by the closures of the borders, of the quarantining period, that negatively impacted their revenue so much that they have canceled all of their projects that were scheduled for 2020. Obviously that affects WSP as a company, me as that client relationship manager, because all of that revenue that we were planning on for 2020 prior to the pandemic happening is now gone. And nobody knows when that client is going to recover from that, because that funding and that revenue for those projects that they use to pay us to do the design and inspection work has been impacted so severely that they're not even sure if they're going to make that up in 2021. So, you know, this is a client that we've had for years and years, and have done constant work with them throughout that entire time. And all of a sudden, all of that work is just cold turkey stopped on their properties. All of it is just, nothing is happening right now. So I feel for them. That revenue loss is real. I've been on site and seen the change in the volume of traffic and that kind of thing that's happened over the 6 months, and it is drastic. So it's not only us as the consultants and the designers, the engineers, the inspectors doing the work, but it's our client that's really hurting, you know, in the first place. So this pandemic has, I think, affected, depending on where you are in the industry, both sides, right? The client side and the designer, consultant, architect side, because that's, if they lose their funding, if they lose their revenue source, they can't pay us, right? And so then that work just stops until something changes, something drastic changes to be able to open that up again. So that's something that we've seen that's been hurtful to us as a business, but hurtful also for us seeing our client in that position. Obviously, they count on that revenue stream, not just for, you know, improvement projects, but rehabilitation and upkeep and standard operations and maintenance. So yeah, it's not just affecting us, it's our clients as well.
Interesting perspective there. Thank you.
I want to jump in because I'm actually from the generation that whenever I graduated, there was a crisis, economical crisis. So I graduated from Royal College of Art 7-8 years ago, and then Europe was going through a giant economical crisis back then. So they were trying to not have any more people come into to Europe so they can manage their own workload. And it was an interesting time. So, and it was similar when I did my undergrad. There was a big crisis in Turkey. I am originally Turkish. And then that took a while. So I believe our work, well, as a designer, I think our work is to create value. So as a small business, small design studio owner, it's only 5 of us. I believe each time I need to create a project, so to create value, so we'll start creating benefits around it. So when you actually start moving, so I was joking before the call that whenever there's a crisis, I moved, but I had to move somehow, but I also created projects around it. And it was similar with the COVID situation. So for example, when I graduated 2013, the big crisis in UK, they canceled all the OPT after school students visas. So you were not able to stay and get a job. And then that's the whole point, to go to Europe to have a master's degree. Similar to coming to US, you try your chances in the field. But then I actually built Form and Seek, which started as a collective, which I curated shows with my classmates to actually showcase our work in big design shows. So people will pick it up, or our studio name actually will be out there. Actually, that collaboration worked very well. We had, I don't know, 17 shows in the last 7 years, including Frame magazine. We have one coming out in Wilson Projects. But the idea is, it was similar with COVID. So the this hits you. I mean, and if you don't have a guarantee, like if you're not in a, well, you're always in a stress in a big firm, they can follow you, but this hits you and you need to find a backup plan. And freelancers or small studio owners knows that you keep on pitching new stuff, so you never actually have a big gap in between. But I was wrapping up a project when COVID hit, and it was like a silence for a while. So then my idea was, okay, what we can do online workshops, we can start creating like videos, or like you have to continue kind of communicating what you're doing. We started to curate this show, which is for the Design Month Detroit. I started networking with people, so we gather a good group of designers, you know. But all of these, some people think like it's a lot of work, but it's also create values around your business, and it's actually shows, like what I say is, if there's no enough bread, there's no enough meatballs. So you have to work. Like in our line, you cannot really wait and sit in the corner and expect things to come to you. In our work, it's not happening that way. So you gotta work, even though no one is looking at you. Actually, it's good that no one is looking at you. You gotta work and do good design, and then you need to find a platform to show. So I moved a lot to deal with crisis. That's how I actually, my habit of working with international designers, international companies, comes from that. The habit is like, okay, this place is in crisis, what do we do next? But what happened with COVID, everyone was on crisis. So what do you do then? So I think that people were more understanding then, and after a month we started to get our new projects because people adapted. But yeah, my tips to anyone who has their own business, I guess you need to create a light in the end of the tunnel on your own. No one's going to create an opportunity or light for you. You kind of dig for yourself.
I really appreciate that. And I think I want to build on this conversation by bringing this question into play. The saying, when nothing is sure, anything is possible, right? And I believe that was English author Margaret Drabble who said that. So what is the biggest possibility? What is the biggest opportunity as designers at this time? I mean, Nur, I think you painted a gorgeous picture of, you saw an economic downturn and you either moved locations, but you expanded your network, your Rolodex, you launched a company, you looked for these other opportunities. I'd offer that same question to my other panelists here. What is the biggest opportunity? What is the possibility when we're in a moment where nothing is 100% sure of how we're going to go forward?
I was going to make, maybe as Nur was talking about it, maybe make a distinction between the profession and the discipline, at least as it relates to architecture. And so, and maybe to be more polemical about it, and to say that when we're busy as a profession, I don't think there's as many or as innovative ideas that are happening. That we are so busy satisfying clients that we're doing that work. And at least in architecture and construction, it so closely mirrors, or even in some case forecasts, broader economic trends, that what we see when, and like Nur, I graduated undergrad into a recession, but there's also, and I think Chris, you and I talked about this when we were talking about the panel, is like in architecture, at least, there's this notion of paper architecture or research or R&D or other types of things. And so there's an opportunity, I would say, having the luxury to look at this from a certain perspective and to look at it historically, there's an incredible wealth of projects that grow out of periods when architects are out of work. Because what do? We're considering all those ideas that weren't able to come to fruition. We're still designing things, we're imagining other possibilities. And so there's, and maybe out of this even comes some notion of like, what's your pandemic project that you're working on? What's the R&D that you're doing? What are the ideas that if someone comes along and wants to build something, what are those kind of opportunities, and where do we go from it? And so I think at a maybe an intellectual or a disciplinary level, there's an increase in the production of ideas, whereas maybe when we're busy as a profession, there's an increase in the production of projects or like actionable built projects. Whereas I think there's a way that we can become a little more introspective in terms of what are we doing as a discipline, where should we be heading, what are the things that we should be looking at, and how do we emerge from this type of thing with a new take on it.
That's an interesting perspective, Karl. I appreciate that. Anyone else to jump in on that on the panel?
Yeah, similar to what Nur was saying about like this idea of creating value, I think there is a way, speaking about architectural designers, at least where I work, or a lot of people I work with, or those recently coming out of graduation, oftentimes it seems like the role of an architect is to understand details, is to understand drawing and materials. And I think that is an outcome of a lot of ideas and a lot of ways we think about certain things. It's showcasing the change or the relationship of people or the relationship of space that you're trying to make. And I think there's a lot of value just in that maybe won't show itself as a built form or a built space. So maybe it's time for architects to rethink how that value can be showcased and how it can change or be a catalyst for other things that maybe aren't what we're so used to showcasing our value as.
Interesting. Jasmine, I wanna post this question to you, and then I'm gonna come to you after Lilian. I'm interested now because we've talked kind of heavily on design practice of product and design practice of architecture, and maybe looking at divergent means or methods to achieve a solution. From an engineering and built environment aspect of things, is this a potential that you see in your industry? Is this something that is historically done, or is it something that we kind of follow the way that things are done because we know they work?
So both, I'll say. I think it just depends. Something that really spoke to me that Karl said was that when you have time, you can be more creative and innovative in your thoughts and in your design and those kinds of things. And when you're not, and you're busy, and in fact, when you're slammed, which is for whatever reason, what has happened to us through the last 6 months, you revert back to what's established and what's been done, because that's the most efficient way to get to, the end. And that's what everybody expected before pandemic, right? Everybody expected these 5 steps to end up at this place, and these are the deliverables at each of those steps, that kind of thing. And so I think it depends. I think it depends on how much latitude for us as consultants. That's one of the things that drives us is how much is your client open to. And a lot of times our clients, our owners that we work with are very like this. They want things that are familiar. They want things that fit in a box. They don't want this out here. Even though we as engineers may propose something that's out here because we see that as being the way things are moving, or we see that as being more efficient, the owners aren't comfortable with that. So we have to give them what they want. It's our responsibility to present those ideas that are out here to them, but it's their final decision about whether they feel comfortable enough to go with something that they're not used to. A lot of our clients are like, I want to see the research. I want to know that other people have done this first, and I want to know that it's been standing for 50 years before I even really listen to what you're proposing to me. That's aside from what we normally do. And again, different clients have different mindsets about things. It just depends. I mean, there's even a change between private and public clients because that is how you determine where your money and your funding comes from, right? Some clients are more free to do different things. their money. So I think for us, at least on the engineering design consulting side, we are constrained a lot by what our clients are open to and what our clients have experience with and what their vision is. It's really up to us to kind of help them develop that into reality. They have this idea and we have to have them get from this idea to this structure or whatever it is. So I think it's a good question, but unfortunately I have to say it depends, right? Because for us it varies so widely based on who you're talking to, what the funding source is, what their comfort level is. So I can have several of those clients with all differing viewpoints all at the same time. So for us, we have to be very flexible, right? To be able to accommodate all of those different things, and sometimes all in a day. So.
Yeah, interesting. A really interesting perspective brought to the table. And Lily.
And maybe before Lilian does that though, just to pick up on something that Jasmine said is like finding the time. And maybe we circle back to it. I think we're all struggling with the blurring that happens between work and home and private and all of these other types of things. And I know when I left for the pandemic to move home, I brought a giant stack of books. It's like, oh, I'll be able to read all of these, right? And it just, that time has never really, like, it hasn't been just lounging around reading and drawing and sketching. It's been filled by Zooming for the most part. And so I think we have to be careful of how maybe we protect our time as it relates to that too.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective there. True. I know I still have a pile of books over here my own self and a couple softwares I was going to learn. So fair. Lilian?
Yeah, with respect to time, graphic design or communication design can actually happen really quickly. So we have a lot of clients who've had to very, very quickly pivot their business or their mode of operation or their messaging strategies. We had a client that was supposed to launch like during the lockdown, and it was a food related business. So very, very quick, and like launch for the very first time. So very quickly we had to work with that client to identify new strategies for the way that the business can pivot and quickly respond to those things. So things related to like customer experience design, so the different touch points that a customer has with the product or service, or things like messaging strategies to help mitigate anxieties about going somewhere or consuming something. And so, you know, in what we do, we've been very busy and, you know, responding to various different problems very quickly. And it's actually been, I mean, it's been challenging and, you know, anxiety ridden for a lot of the people that we've been working with, but it's been a really interesting process to work in that kind of nimble, quick, iterative testing way.
Yeah. I want to pause here for a moment and open up to a couple questions to our viewers here, because we've been going for just about an hour. I do want to read one that connects right along the lines of the conversation that we're having from Bonnie. Bonnie says, along those lines, necessity is the mother of invention, from Plato. As a local example, Batch Brewing just built an outdoor pavilion that they had no plans to build, so they could adapt the way that they deliver products and services in response to social distancing regulations. We believe designers can drive a lot of those ideas and adaptations. I'm curious how local designers are getting that message out to potential new customers, and what the challenges are in closing those details. And we've got kind of a broad spectrum from here. Jasmine, who says there's some clients who are open to it and other ones who aren't accepting it at all. Lauren, at the scale that you're working, Nur and Lilian and Karl at the scale you're working, how do you bring to the forefront that you as a designer, you as a person in this profession are primed to actually be able to offer that perspective or be able to offer that ability to pivot or find that new solution? I'd even drive this further from a business and economic standpoint. How do you draw that to the forefront, that that's your value proposition that you're able to bring to the table? It is a good question.
I'm gonna jump in. It's tricky. I mean, it's especially in a situation like Bonnie's example, it's hard to jump in unless you're very well known in the local environment, that they know that you build that patio, you have the services. So what we do is we keep our portfolio updated all the time, use the right channels. Our website is like updated weekly. The social media challenge that shows what we're working on, even though it's a new project, it might not be. So when, as product designers, when you start doing something, and I'm sure it might be similar for graphic designers or architects, that if you work with glass, everyone thinks you only work with glass. So it takes a while till you break that loop that you can actually work with other projects. So that's why we keep all of our channels updated. So they see, we might do a toothbrush now, we might do a glass lamp next day, but the prospective clients needs to, people like Jasmine's point, people need to see to actually request that. It's not they don't want to be too adventurous about what's out there, and it's our job to convince that how it's going to work and how the design going to work. But what first thing come to my mind is like keeping your communications up. And I know everyone talked about wearing multiple hats in this day of time, and I was thinking in the conversation with other things that we were talking about, time is like running, and we somehow need to answer it. So people are more impatient, or like if you haven't updated your website, you kind of a little old news. So you have to, as designers, our job is not only, okay, I'll sit on my white desk and draw sketch things and that I like. It's way beyond that. It's, you need to communicate what you're designing, communicate in a public channel, so people can actually start picking up on that, on those things that you can do.
Yeah, great insight there. Thank you, Nur. Does anyone else want to add to that? Crickets. No, this is great. I'm actually gonna piggyback off of that. I'm gonna ask one more question, then we'll open up to anyone who'd like to turn their mic on and ask our panelists a question. But to this exact thing, we've talked a lot about what your firsthand experience has been, what experiences have been like in the past for you that have been kind of these really shifts, really large shifts in workplace and the means in which you're working. Advice to a new, either emerging or an established designer who's out there looking to start their own thing, or maybe was furloughed or laid off of work over this period of time because of the COVID crisis. If you had one piece of strong advice for that young person, what would it be for a way to either better themselves, expand their skill set, or make it work through a moment like this pandemic that we're going through now? I'm gonna call you by name, so none of you are getting out of it. We'll start with you, Karl. Yep, unmute.
I think it's a good question. I think I was trying to think, maybe I'll, after this, do the research that supports my statement, but I think if we look at trends and we start to look at who emerges from a recession, I think it is a moment where people set themselves up, or companies set themselves up really well right now to emerge from something. And so I think, like from Nur's perspective, like there are products that are needed now. I think about Lilian and how, as designers, I think we get really comfortable operating in areas that we're not familiar with. And so like Lilian's point about working with someone that's launching a brand that's related to food during this time is like, there's an incredible opportunity, because experience, maybe Jasmine's industry aside, like experience almost doesn't matter anymore. Or there's again a kind of neutralizing quality, because so much of what we took as the stable reality that existed before March doesn't exist anymore. And so how do we, there is no experience to build from. So an emerging designer, the world is wide open right now to do some of those things. And anybody's perspective, I mean, granted, I'm not suggesting that we're reckless with anybody's health or safety or welfare, but I think in terms of tried and tested design approaches, things are wide open right now, and there's a lot of opportunities. And I think designers are incredibly skilled at being curious, researching possibilities, and then prototyping those for other people to build from. And so I think it's all of the incredibly terrible things aside, this is to look at this in an opportunistic or in a very, look at the opportunities and the positive aspects that could come from this, means that we're at a moment where designers could find these incredible moments to do something.
So really taking advantage of the opportunity that's at your fingertips.
I mean, I have two friends in New York that just started a practice in like January of last year. And I was talking to them recently, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, you guys, you left your jobs and you started a new firm. Like, sorry. And they're like, no, it's been amazing. Like, we picked up all of these projects. We did all of these things. They do mostly residential, and people are now stuck at home and they want to redo their houses. And so, these guys picked up a bunch of projects as a result of it. And so like, you never really know, but now seems like a really good time to try that thing that you've been toying with in the back of your mind.
Interesting.
And I think it's, to build off of what you're saying, it's so important to pay attention to what's going on and to identify these new design problems or opportunities. And then being open to kind of shifting what you think you can do. Because as designers, there's an element of what you know already that can adapt into this new realm and learn and grow and figure it out and become an expert in. And so I think if you're tuned into these kinds of things and you're looking for these new problems that have emerged, there's so many places that you can go and fit into. And I mean, some of that is also, you need to collaborate or talk to other people, and you might not be able to do it on your own, but being open to figuring out how that can be done, I think, is essential. I also think there's a lot of opportunity right now in just the collapse of space. So not just time, but space, where, you could be doing a project that's across the country or across the world right now, and there's less of an expectation that you need to fly there and operate out of that space. So I think that's created more opportunities as well for people.
Interesting. Great insight. Lauren or Nur or Jasmine, any thoughts?
Yeah, what I have found to be a really fun and unexpected resource in all of this is that people are now sharing almost anything on Zoom links. So there's a lot more like free colleges giving free webinars, people who also need to find other work and get their ideas out there. So in their way of marketing and branding are sharing a lot more information. So I think looking at panel discussions and webinars and connecting with people that are offering their time that you wouldn't have had access to before, or you weren't in that place before, is a really great tool. I've watched quite a few that seemed a little off from what I do, but found very interesting, and at least got me thinking about how, I could have helped in that, or how it might impact what I do. So I think just keeping an eye out for those, it just at least keeps you inspired if, things aren't going great.
That's interesting. Nur or Jasmine.
And building up on that, it also creates a platform to, so before I was talking about like showcasing your work and putting yourself out there, and it was causing money, a lot of travel and time before. But COVID created this opportunity that everything is virtual. Even though we planned those experiences to be more smoother, but I don't think anyone in the creative industry see themselves in going to a giant fair like Milan Design Week with millions of people anymore. But it created a thing that you can now join, like Maison Objet in Paris, for example, happening right now, that you can actually join there and have your own digital booth. And it's actually much more easier and accessible. And for newly graduate or someone starting their own practice, I would strongly recommend it, because that's the way we currently currently showcase our design. Those are the platforms that people are using to still be in business. Another thing is, I think we need to remember that some of the habits that we're having right now, that we adapted in this last 6 months, it's gonna stay. Some of it's gonna be in the etiquette that it's gonna be. I don't think all the jobs are gonna go to like proper 9 to 5 offices. Like we will be removed because people realize maybe you don't need an office, right? Figure it, like designers always work from home and everyone was like, oh, you don't have an office, and now it's a good thing anyway. But I was talking with my newly grad students, and I would say look at remote jobs, because everyone was looking at jobs in Michigan or places that they can travel. But I think it's a great time to look at different opportunities and look even further away, because it's much more acceptable right now to work with different time zones, to work with different states. That's my bit of advice.
Interesting, really interesting insight there, right? What happens when you can do, and we're working out of China, you're working out of the EU, the Middle East, so on and so forth. And it is, to your exact point, acceptable to say, hey, I can jump on this call, but I can't do these ones, but I can get this product to you turned around over that period of time. Yeah, really interesting. Jasmine, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what I would say is be flexible. Okay. We don't have a choice right now, right? And you know, earlier on, we really didn't have a choice. We weren't allowed to leave our houses, you know. So that's loosened up a little bit. But in order to keep moving forward, you have to pivot and you have to change the way that we're all operating in order to keep going. Sort of what I spoke about with one of our clients, would impact the negative impact to their revenue, the severe negative impact on their revenue. Within, say my office in downtown Detroit, there's probably 6 to 10 different disciplines that work out of our office. And so any number of those disciplines can have been impacted negatively by clients losing revenue, therefore taking away work from us. So what I encouraged my staff and a lot of other staff, newer staff especially, is to look into cross-training at this time. Make sure that you, because so much of our work in engineering is intertwined, especially if you think about transportation-focused things. You know, we may design a bridge, but how do you get to a bridge? By the roads, right? So, you know, you don't just have a bridge, a structural engineer, you have a roadway engineer. And with that roadway engineer, you have a traffic engineer that's designing the traffic. Obviously, to build the bridge and the road, you have the construction group. So there's all of these things that are intertwined. And it's always been my viewpoint that to be a better engineer, you need to understand how things all work together, design-wise, but you also have to know how they're built. If you're designing things that aren't practical out in the field, you know, then you're really not applying engineering the way that you're supposed to be. And so I've encouraged my staff, as well as you know, some of our newer engineers, not the brand new ones, but even the ones that are, you know, up to 5 years in, start cross trainings. Take this opportunity for you know, education in the different disciplines, sort of like what Lauren was talking about, you know, reaching out of your comfort zone into different areas and start learning about those things. See if you can be helpful to these other groups. Some groups may be slower, other groups may be completely overwhelmed and not have enough staff. So if you can be helpful to many different disciplines, many different groups, speaking of economic downturns, if, you know, I've been working for 20 years, I've worked through a couple of recessions where people have downsized their staff. If you're one of those people that are beneficial to several different groups, and those groups can advocate for you and say, hey, but so-and-so, yeah, they might be in this, you know, in the structures group, but they really helped me out in the field doing inspection, you know, I don't want to lose them, they were great, you know, kind of thing. Then, you know, you up your own value.
Mm.
in multiple facets, in multiple areas. So I think if you're willing to open yourself up and learn different things and help other groups and work with new people, I think you can only expand your knowledge, improve yourself as an engineer, and then also up your value to the company. So.
Hmm. Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Well, at this time, what I'm going to do is we've got a few more minutes here. Let me open it up to any of our Zoom panel attendees here. The bottom 3 rows on my screen of this Zoom call. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask our panelists? Do remember to unmute your mic, because that's something we've all learned during COVID. A muted mic does not help for collaboration.
I have a quick question. First of all, shout out to all of the female faces, women that I see on this call, and especially to Lilian Crum, just recently recognized as one of Crane's notable women in design.
And Nur.
There may be a few others on the call too, but super, super excited. Congratulations, Lilian and Megan, and all of the Design Core partners.
And me, Bonnie, you forgot me.
And Nur too. Yeah, sorry. I know. I was like looking through the article before I said multiple people. So congratulations. It's great to see, and we're proud to support all of the women designers out there, but also still working really hard to increase the level of diversity and create more access for all the people of color that are doing design and practicing design throughout the city also. And so I would just be curious to the panel, what thoughts or suggestions do you employ in your own practice, or would you have for other firm leaders who were trying to build a more diverse talent pipeline in their practice?
At WSP, it starts with community involvement and outreach. WSP has been so supportive of my passion in mentoring and working with students, and I think part of that starts, developing their network, developing your network with them. They become part of the pool for internships for us, and then obviously full-time employees, once they, graduate from school. The support that I've received from WSP as far as some of the programs that I've been involved with to outreach to underrepresented and disadvantaged students has been enormous. And I think a lot of that starts with leadership, and our leadership kind of believes that whatever you put out into the world, you get back. And so they believe in putting out all those good vibes, if you will. And one of the things that's most rewarding for me is being able to know that I'm contributing to the future pool of engineers and architects and designers and the industry, by letting these students know that this is something that's there for you and this is something that you can do. A lot of these students that we are reaching out to don't know any engineers. They don't know architects. They don't know designers. And when they think about an engineer, they don't think me, right? When they think about, a structures group manager, when they think about an assistant vice president, this is not what they think of. So I want to put that in front of them and say, hey, look, if I can do this, you can do this. And then to be able to put, a project in front of them, have them work on it, surrounded by other engineers and architects and designers and inspectors and skilled tradesmen. They realize this is, and I've heard students actually say this in these programs, I didn't know I could do this. I had no, they think it's like way out here and that there's no way they can do it because they've never been around it before. They've never had somebody in their family that was an engineer. So they think engineering is just it's way too hard. I can't do that. And so I think that's one thing that's important, is it starts, within. It starts with the people and the support in your company. It starts with the people that have the passion. It starts with the people that are that are that have that positive outlook and want to encourage that diversity in the workplace, but also to develop the diversity in the industry in general, right? So even if it's not just engineering, it could be, you know, like graphic designers, you know, for example, so which we don't have in our office, for example, but you know, we still want to encourage students to explore these options that they never thought were out there for them. So that's my experience.
Yeah, and I'd say Jasmine and I both serve on the ACE board, which is or ACE mentorship, which is architecture, construction, engineering. And so I think Jasmine is trying to change the industry. I'm interested in changing the industry as well. And I think we know it comes through education, but in higher ed, we're also having to reach to the high school level to try and change the diversity at higher ed as a way of doing that. And so Jasmine and I see amazing examples of working with high school students where we expose them to design and engineering and construction, and it opens their eyes to things that they had never imagined were possible before.
I was just going to add to helping to communicate the different pathways to achieve that, because it's not always the same pathway. And so, you know, educating them, but also creating different types of pipelines to that ultimate goal, I think is really important.
Yeah, excellent question. Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you all for your excellent answers. There's no doubt, and we're very lucky that actually all of our panelists across the bar here have been involved in some way, shape, or form with the pipeline of education and increasing access. So cheers to you all as panelists. Thank you. Other questions from the audience? I'm like, this is where I start doing the auction, going twice.
I was going to plug one other aspect, because Lilian and I are both involved in it, which is, to Lilian's point about building different types of opportunities and pathways, is Lilian just worked with a client called Citizen Robotics, which is looking to 3D print houses in Detroit, but in addition to doing that, building a fab lab that also trains future contractors, future 3D house printers, whatever that may be, and trying to do that at different levels of education or different age groups as well, I'd say.
Yeah, so there is a robust group of programs out there that I think everyone would argue the opportunity to get involved with and support is absolutely there. To piggyback on that, to Karl's point of view, I know Detroit Public Schools now, in collaboration with Lawrence Tech, has launched the first ever middle college in the history of the city of Detroit and in the history of Detroit Public Schools as a district. That's taking a 4-year high school program, building onto it to be a 5-year high school program, and graduating those students with an associate's degree at no cost to the student themselves in high-powered career pathways. You know, and this is, I think, as we start looking at how the education, I won't call it industry, how education is shifting, especially in the K through 12 area, and the potential for these kind of important collaborations like Mod Public, like higher ed to K through 12, like the work that's being done by ACE and by large scale companies is really, really brilliant. And if we want to see this inclusive and diverse community going forward, which we know for a fact is a better, more robust, producing better product, better people, better society, a better world that we have to double down that investment as much as we can. All right. Well, I am going to take this moment and thank all of our panelists for your time today. I want to thank all of you who joined us on this Zoom call for this conversation. I want to take a moment again and thank Lawrence Tech and the College of Architecture and Design for supporting us putting on this event. And of course to Design Core Detroit for producing a 10th annual and excellent month of design here in Detroit. There's no way that you can't not credit a group who not only goes 10 years strong and helps build our community and our region with regards to this important work, but has the courage and tenacity to do it during COVID on a complete remote platform. So thank you to everyone. We will be posting this lecture for those of you who might want to share it with a colleague or are interested in revisiting some of this, our excellent answers by our panelists. And that'll be through our social media platforms, through all of our panelists, but also through the College of Architecture and Design at LTU and through the DCDT. So again, thank you all so much for your time today. Have a wonderful evening, and please make sure that you're checking out the Month of Design website for the other happenings that are going on. I know Lauren's leaving us to join another lecture discussion right now, so there's not a lack of amazing things to be involved with. So thank you all so much.